The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, and it is Wednesday, July 28th, and the world is on fire. We're in crisis. We can't even get Congress to act on the terrorist attacks against them. And guess what? COVID's back, even for those who are vaccinated. That's the state of the world today. I am, of course, as you all know, I've been doing the show from Greece, and I myself have been faced with the scare of COVID, even though I am fully vaccinated. And Greece has these laws in place or rules in place right now where if you're going to go inside, if you're going to eat at a restaurant, you have to be vaccinated. You have to show proof of vaccination before you eat inside of a restaurant. You're not allowed to dance, but there is live music. I'm not really sure how that plays into it, but you're also, able to exercise inside. You are able to go into stores, and some stores are obviously more strict than others. You have to prove you're vaccinated, or they'll only allow a certain number in. And of course, masks are all mandated inside. But even with all of that, Greece's vaccination rates as a country are at 45%, which we will talk about with our first guest today, as well as other countries are facing similar issues. Even with all of that, we had a little scare. So my friend who has been gracious enough to host the Nomiki Show while I am here because he has incredible internet. That's basically it. That's the rule here and the space. He works for an international organization, a human rights organization, and everybody in his office needs to be vaccinated and has been vaccinated. And he had the Moderna vaccine, which is supposed to be, the strongest, if not one of the strongest vaccines to fight off Delta. And so did his colleagues. And by the way, so did I. Well, turns out he ended up getting COVID, the Delta variety. He and his colleagues, they started to get sick over the weekend. He got sick a couple days later. And turns out I may have COVID as well. I don't know yet. I got tested today. We shall see by the end of the day. I'm hoping I don't. But one thing can be said for sure, and I bring this up not to be like the vaccines don't work. Clearly, they work. They work. They're doing their part. COVID rates have gone down, especially hospitalizations have gone down to levels, lower than ever. With that being said, yes, COVID is spreading. But as we know, if you contract COVID, the Delta variant, with a vaccine, having received a vaccine, 2 doses, with enough time that it's especially the stronger vaccines, the ones that are reporting better, being able to fight this off better, you are not going to have the effects, the severe effects. It protects the most, it's more likely to protect the most vulnerable in our community, but that only matters if you have a vaccine. So this is spreading partly because we have people who are still refusing to get vaccinated, and they are displaying stronger symptoms. And the stronger your symptoms are, the more you're able to pass it on. And those who've received a vaccine can also receive the Delta variant, but of course their symptoms are not as strong. So yes, they can pass it on to others, but it is not as strong. Meaning, if you're you're extremely sick, you are more likely to share the Delta variant. And as a result, it is spreading at a faster rate. It's why they shut down Mykonos, the party island, last week. You can't play music anymore on Mykonos, which if you know anything about Mykonos, it's like saying you can't play music in Vegas or in Miami Beach. And it's the middle of the summer. It's the livelihoods for so many people. And the islands have higher vaccination rates because their livelihoods depend on having tourists. Of course, every country is dealing with it in their own way. We are going to talk about that on today's show because it's spreading fast in the US, it's spreading quickly across Europe, and of course, it has already gone through its rounds in other countries like India. But this is serious stuff. We have to have to be strict about vaccinations. And, my friend is frustrated because he did get vaccinated. He doesn't understand it. He expressed that he didn't understand, why even get it if you're going to end up contracting COVID. But of course, he's going to do fine. He's displaying cold symptoms. I, of course, have no symptoms at this point, and hopefully I don't have COVID. But again, it just reduces the rates. The more people get vaccinated, the rate of sharing and spreading this Delta variant go down. The more people are vaccinated. So the more people are vaccinated, even if they get COVID, the Delta variant, and how many of those who are vaccinated will actually get it? Even if they get it, the symptoms that they display are anything from sniffles to a sore throat to nothing to maybe flu. But it's still nowhere near what the original COVID-19 variant was showing, in which people are showing up at hospitals. So first we're fighting the no maskers. Now we're fighting the no vaxxers. And of course it has become highly politicized. But the one thing that is fascinating about this moment is you have figures in the Republican Party who realize enough is enough. Some people are trying to lie and have one foot in the populist, vax denial door and one foot out to preserve, whatever base that they have or ratings that they have or donors that they have. My guess is all of these people have been vaccinated and that they are protected, at least at this point. The fact that it is becoming this politicized at this point is, it's like the failure of the Roman Empire. At what point were we going to realize we are really in a downward spiral that we can't get out of, whether it's climate change, the forest fires that are popping up on the West Coast, or here outside of Athens, just north of Athens, there are tremendous forest fires. It's happening all over the world, or the floods. At what point is enough? And I don't really know. And I know we talk about this every week on the show, but I don't know what it's going to take. I can tell you we're not doing enough. Great that we're getting some wins in Congress, but it is not happening at a fast enough rate to really combat the misinformation. We are not regulating these platforms enough. And I say regulating because, they're not free. They're not democratic. They're not open. They're heavily skewed and designed to skew towards white men who are appealing to a right-wing populist base. And this is happening all over the world. So if the United States is not going to be able to regulate it because we have such a partisan, Washington that's at a complete stalemate and can't get over themselves, then perhaps the EU will. I don't know what it's going to take, but something has got to happen fast. Misinformation is spreading like crazy, and that leads to, obviously, an attempted coup in Washington, D.C., but also the spread of the anti-vax movement. The fact that Tucker Carlson can say, go do your own research, I'm not a doctor. Well, what is that code for? Go do your own research on Facebook? Go read Alex Jones's blog? Because that's the research those folks are doing that are watching Tucker Carlson's show. We should not lean on Tucker Carlson to be our moral compass, to make sure that the anti-vaxxers are really realizing how much the humanity and the freedom that they love so much depends on their being responsible human beings. Responsible human beings who care about their country, who say that they take a bullet for their country, who say that family first, the flag first. Well, there's no family, there's no flag, there's no freedom, there's no foundation of any sort of democracy, there's no Facebook if the power grid can't hold it up. If this country continues to have massive spirals of masks are going to be a permanent part of your life, whether you like it or not. And that is what's going to happen. And we're going to keep having these mandates, and people are still going to keep protesting, and they're going to keep spreading COVID-19 until the US government or the EU or whatever sane government decides enough is enough. These platforms are dangerous when they are not democratic. Because I want to make that very clear. The right wing likes to say censorship. It's not democratic. It is not democratic. My voice is not as strong as Ben Shapiro's voice. And let me tell you, the money that you put in, you get out. You get out whatever you want to get. So if it was purely democratic, the way that they all articulated it as being, in the mid-2000s, when I joined Facebook, when I joined Twitter, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. They used to say free speech is the answer to free speech. I don't think this is about free speech anymore. There's no free speech. I'm not getting the same airwaves as Ben Shapiro, and we came up at the same time. We were up on the same cable news networks. We had the same ratings, and in some cases, I had better ratings than him. But he has a political agenda that has a lot more money behind it than our political agenda, which is democracy. Because at the root of it all, democratic socialism, as Bernie Sanders says so well, the best way to define democratic socialism is more democracy. It's a fascist platform, and I'm not going to stop talking about it because this is the effect when you have this kind of money being poured into these platforms to skew towards extreme right-wing agendas. This is not your centrist Republican agenda anymore. This is an extreme right-wing agenda that only props up people like Orban, only props up people like Marine Le Pen, only props up people like Donald Trump and whoever's next. Only props up people like Bolsonaro. The same things are happening in all these different supposedly democratic stronghold countries around the world. And of course, in non-democratic countries. But the effects are more people die, more fires, more earthquakes, more tornadoes, more floods, and more right-wing wins. So it's time for whoever it is to step up and show their profiles and courage. I'm actually looking at not just the centrist Dems, but the centrist Republicans. You should own this. These are your people. You have to start fighting them as well. Can't just be us anymore. All right, everybody, we have a wonderful show today. We have Tassos Morfis. He has been on before. He is a reporter here in Athens, where I am right now. He has been a really great independent journalist who has dug into much of the political corruption that's happened in this city and in this country. And he's going to tell us a little bit about how the far right is protesting their center right prime minister and other politics that are happening here. Very excited to have him on. And then later we have our favorite, Rep Rabb and Arun Chaudhary are back to talk about the news of the world right now. So stick around. We will be right back with Tassos Morfis. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Tassos Morfis is back to TNS. He is the co-founder, editor, and he's on the board of the Steering Committee of AthensLive. We are just, like a 20-minute walk away from each other right now, except I'm quarantined for the moment, which actually leads to the conversation we're about to have, because turns out, for our Greek Americans watching right now, are about to go to Greece. You can't go to Mykonos. What's going on, Tassos, in Mykonos and other islands in relation to the Delta variant?
So everyone was wondering a couple months ago when tourism opened in Greece. Everyone was wondering what was going to happen. Most scientists said that the variants are going to take over, and this thing cannot be controlled very, very easily. So it made obvious. Everything was made obvious when Mykonos, the flagship island of the Greek tourism, like worldwide famous, with all the celebrities arriving in the private jets. Mykonos was placed in the highest risk zone by the ministry, and this is a great example to see how dangerous it was for tourism to be allowed in Greece, and also that the wealthiest island in the country was the epicenter of the virus. More incidents are recorded more COVID cases are recorded and registered on several other islands. We have teenagers were getting the Delta variant, and we're having families who are being quarantined in hotels, in specialist hotels. And this is why the government has been seeking to increase the number of hotels who are offered to those who are infected. And So you have this very weird phenomenon where COVID cases on the islands are increasing. More islands are being placed in the higher risk zones, and the government, on the other hand, is very optimistic about the state of tourism, and ministers go out in the media and say publicly that arrivals are going to increase and travelers are going to come and flights are booked, and we're waiting for 350 flights from the US in August, and all that kind of stuff. The transmission of the Delta variant is so rapid, and with half of Greeks being vaccinated today, the 28th, we hit the 5 million vaccinations mark, which means that something between 45% and 50% of the population is fully vaccinated, and this should prepare us for the worst in autumn. It's going to be very tough. It's going to be a very tough autumn, and it's going to be super challenging for the national healthcare system.
So, okay, a few things here. So somebody got the virus on the island of Mykonos, which I'm not sure how every other island. I was in Kalinos a few weeks ago, and my hotel, which had I think 12 rooms or something, was halfway full. So tourism at that stage was definitely down. I don't know how it is in Mykonos, but what I've been reading is that it was very hard for people to find hotels to stay at, and they couldn't go to other islands. Can you explain just the dynamics of what happens when you suddenly have the Delta variant and you have to go into quarantine and leave your hotel and leave your, whoever you're with. And of course, as a virus works, more and more people have to go through that.
So when you are officially registered as a COVID case, you need to leave the hotel you have booked, and you need to go into another hotel that's booked by the national healthcare system as a quarantine hotel to isolate. There are also incidents and cases where some people some islands didn't have rooms to spare for such situations. And people I heard one case, I think it was in Paros, where a bunch of 18-year-olds, they had to stay at the parking lot in order to, I'm laughing, but it's really, really sad,
You could just get a tent and sit on the beach. Come on now.
Yeah, exactly. And the worst part is that when there are no quarantine hotels in the island that you're residing or you're visiting, you have no option to get transferred to another island, or board some kind of Coast Guard vessel and get to hop on another island or take the ferry. So while we have hospital admissions due to COVID increasing, we don't have enough hotels on the islands to quarantine and isolate the cases. And this shows basically how unprepared we were as a state, and how the government put revenue over lives. And this is why now the whole island situation is getting out of hand.
So the government, I think our audience remembers that Syriza was in power a couple of years ago, and then Prime Minister Mitsotakis is now the Prime Minister, and without going into just all of the political dynamics, because it could take us 3 hours on the show to talk about the factions. He's been getting protests. Is it fair to say he's from the center right? Is that fair enough? He as a person, more traditionally from the center right?
He's a conservative liberal.
he's a conservative liberal. I don't know if that would translate the same in the US, but okay. He's like a George Bush? It's like, if like for our audience, he's not like a Biden. Because Biden would never
he's like a conservative, way more conservative George Bush.
Okay, so conservative liberal to the U.S. means Joe Biden. So yes, okay, so he's a more conservative George Bush.
From your perspective,
that's what I thought. Okay, good, got it. All right, so Mitsotakis is a conservative George Bush, and he built a coalition with part of the far right, and now he is being protested by an extreme far right who have been protesting his vaccinations. I just have to tell a personal story because I had to bite my tongue and just be a journalist in the moment in the taxi. But just warning to folks, unlike New York, taxis are not progressive here and they all have political opinions.
The yellow side.
So I was leaving the studio last week on Friday. I think it was Friday or Wednesday. I can't remember. And we were driving through Syntagma Square and there's all this chaos going on. And the taxi driver, I realized, was listening to far right-wing radio. I wasn't paying attention at first. And then I was like, oh my God, this is insane. This is like worse than Rush Limbaugh. And then he starts just telling me everything about how Mitsotakis, the right-wing George Bush, is a communist who is partnering up with Joe Biden, and they're fascist communists, and they're cracking down, and they're going to kill us, and it's the end of democracy. It's so confusing. I mean, this is why I say we don't want to talk about this for 3 hours, but it was so confusing to me because I'm like, how could you be against democracy? Okay, I need a chart to map this out, but. Who's a sympathizer, and he said, they're unleashing the police on us and they're beating the anti-vaxxers. And the anti-vaxxers who he was defending were the far right, and they're saying that the police are fascists. Help me understand.
So what happened? If I could put it, if I could somehow draw it on the political spectrum, is that the party of Kyriakos Mitsotakis, New Democracy, the ruling party, has engulfed over the years the right, from the moderates to the extreme far right. They have engulfed ex-Nazi collaborators. They have engulfed people who supported the dictatorship. They have engulfed conservatives. They have engulfed progressives who need a more, let's say, who want a more neoliberal fiscal program, and they couldn't find it in the social democracy or the left. And over the years, he had created, and over the years, New Democracy was becoming some sort of a coalition between all the different parties, all the different parts of the right. So New Democracy has engulfed all the parts of the right, and there is a very popular scheme of things that depicts this engulfment. It's called the right building, the right building block, if I can put it that way, and it shows how all the parts of the right wing are residing in the same building. So Mitsotakis, who was presented as a Harvard-educated liberal, very progressive, very concerned about human rights, found himself leading a party that had super conservatives, far-right extremists, to younger, more moderates. And himself, he might not be so conservative, but when you're leading a flock of a pack of wolves from the right, then you cannot really control your actions, your political actions. So what happened?
Go ahead.
Is that this formation New Democracy, this political party was always accusing the left of being communists, and they were embedding within their statements this rhetoric of the communists and et cetera, et cetera. And they had their backs uncovered, meaning that they had Golden Dawn, who was a Nazi party in the far right, and they were always using it as a scapegoat to wash themselves off from any about any wrongdoings regarding their ideology. So now that Golden Dawn is in jail, they have their backs uncovered, and there is space in the far right, space that is now somehow being covered by the anti-vaxxers. And the thing is that they have messed up. The government has messed up so badly, and they're receiving criticism from the far right. I don't think that the far right in Greece is going to reform itself after Golden Dawn very, very fast and easily. But there is definitely a lot of people who are super disappointed coming from the far right, who are super disappointed with the policies of New Democracy, and they need a way out. So something is brewing, something in the far right is brewing, but I cannot see it somehow in the political spectrum over the next months or probably years. It's very important to know that the government hasn't managed the coronavirus situation in the best way possible. And they have left a lot of space for conspiracy theories, for arguments against vaccination. We had a committee of epidemiologists who sent the wrong signals multiple times. And given also the background that Greece is a very religious country, this created a very explosive mixture that has something that keeps the far right flame burning.
And there were bishops that showed up leading some of these demonstrations, these protests.
This isn't the position, the official position of the church.
Right. While
the church hasn't asked for the believers clearly to go and get vaccinated, they didn't give a very crystal clear directive that folks, we need to get vaccinated. They said something, I don't remember right now the exact phrasing, but they said something like, God should enlighten us so we get the vaccine, something like this.
I have a solution for them. The scientist who came up with the Pfizer vaccine was Greek. So clearly God chose, these are all I'm saying this because they're nationalist, they're religious. God created this Greek man to create the Pfizer vaccine so that you nationalists could take it.
I think he's a refugee. He's a refugee from the
here we go.
Yeah. He's a refugee from the Middle East who grew up in Greece, and
it's like Yannis. They love Yannis, and unless
they don't. They don't. That's the thing. So another very interesting thing is how political sports in Greece are. You have all the progressive part of Greece that supports Yannis and sees Yannis as a perfect role model for various things. And you have all the far right and the center right that supports tennis players, really famous tennis players, such as Tsitsipas and Sakkari, who are phenomenal. But Sakkari is in a relationship with the son's prime minister, and Tsitsipas has, we're also doing gossip.
This is so dramatic. Dramatic. Keep it coming.
And Tsitsipas has always been bragging about wealth and power and money. So
tennis.
They're super political, super sports.
Wait, and then the Australian Greek tennis player. I mean, the diaspora. So here, okay, I'm now strategizing. if the Greek Orthodox Church, which is very, very dependent on the Greek diaspora, which is more conservative, but also very tied into the support of Joe Biden, who's been very close to that, his relationship with the diasporas. We're getting really into the weeds here, but Joe Biden has a very large base of donors from the Greek diaspora in the United States. Very large. I think it might be his biggest, if that's the case. I feel like there might be some there's some wedging that could be done there. Like Biden could just lean in and be like, hey, get things in order here. I mean, that's the thing that, just from an American perspective, I wish Joe Biden could be more of a leader on this and help leaders in different countries, especially Prime Minister Mitsotakis and perhaps the Archdiocese, to understand that you have the power here to move folks in if you actually do it in a constructive way, but not like he knows how to do that.
The policies of Joe Biden are very, very progressive compared to the Mitsotakis policies.
Yes,
there's no way Mitsotakis can relate to Joe Biden because he has several ministers around him that believe that Joe Biden is a communist, and they have been vocal supporters of Trump. You have the minister of development, Adam Georgiadis, was a vocal supporter of Trump, and he was bragging around on TV about how good Trump is and how he would vote for Trump with both hands. So this is a very delicate issue, and we can see the way Mitsotakis is being portrayed in international media and the way Mitsotakis is portrayed in local media. So there is no common ground between Mitsotakis and Joe Biden. Mitsotakis is more of is something between Viktor Orban and Joe Biden, leaning to Orban more.
And Macron and Orban, maybe? I'm trying to find some sort of...
Sorry, but you've seen Macron with all the flowers around his neck, so he somehow escaped my Rolodex. And this is why also the US is building a massive base in Alexandroupoli. There is very strong
a massive what?
A massive army base, yes.
I didn't know that.
There's very strong military cooperation between the two countries. That's why they don't. That's why Mitsotakis is not resulting. He's not making any statements regarding U.S. policies.
On that note, Mitsotakis is being accused, and I know we this was not part of our original commentary, but you said human rights, and I laughed because right now he's being accused of violating international human rights law based on how he's dealing with the refugees. So we may just have you back on again because I'm going to be here for a while, so we can talk about all the other things, the femicides, the feminist movement. But there's the refugee camps here, of course, and of course refugees haven't been coming over the same rate because of COVID, but can you help us understand? They're shutting down many of these refugee camps. He's blocking refugees from coming in right now. Can you explain the dynamics?
So in 2019, it was in the first months of 2019, there were hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of refugees who were trying to enter Greece from its soil borders in Alexandroupoli, in the northern part of Greece. And Mitsotakis was in power very few months, and this was a starting point in order to tighten security and in order to move into a new phase with the Greece-Turkey relations and EU-Turkey relations. And this was a pivotal moment because after that, Greece started tightening security on the sea, doing pushbacks. It's recorded on camera. Human rights organizations.
What's a pushback?
Pushback means I'm a refugee and I'm trying to to enter another country, and this country is sending me back to where I came from.
On a boat, and a Navy vessel says to them, go back to, I mean,
Yes.
some of these islands just for how much distance? I mean, I've been to some of these islands. Like, can you explain the distance to Turkey?
It can be about half a mile, from half a mile to 3, 4, 5, 6 miles. They're pretty close. Like some people swim. And pushback means that you have a Coast Guard vessel that is circling the life raft, the inflatable boat with the refugees, and is eventually pushing the boat with the waves from the motor back to Turkish waters. It's a violation of human rights. Greece has been doing this deliberately, and also has been not admitting it deliberately. And the worst part is that under Mitsotakis, refugee camps across Greece are being walled. And what I mean is that Greece is literally building massive walls around refugee camps. And this is something that, as Greeks, we shouldn't accept for sure. But it happened during COVID, and no one could resist. So yeah, under Mitsotakis, things have been worsening for refugees, and they're only going to worsen.
And he's closing them down. Is it correct that he's closing them down, and within 6 months, the refugees have to find housing, full-time employment in this beautiful economy that most Greeks are just, killing it out right now.
And I was reading today that banks are blocking the accounts of refugees. So many are left without any pocket money, because we're talking about pocket money. We're not talking about any large amount. We're talking about pocket money that has been provided by the UN. So yeah, the situation is deteriorating a lot. I really don't know what's going to happen after autumn, where the economy is going to be literally in shambles, and Greece is totally out of money, and probably Erdogan. We're going to have some developments in our relationship with Erdogan. So yeah, it's pretty tough.
Why is that with Erdogan? What's the development?
It's because Erdogan has appeared on Cyprus, on the northern part of Cyprus, that has been invaded by Turks in 1974. And he has made some statements. Also, there are some oil drilling vessels who are circling Greek islands. There are fighter jets that are dogfighting with Greek fighter jets. Generally, there is tension. We bought billions. We bought fighter jets from France worth billions when we couldn't, during COVID, when we couldn't build ICUs and hospitals, and there are 30,000 pupils being left out of university. Why Greece is interesting from a left perspective, it's because you can see clearly how a neoliberal agenda is being implemented very, very strategically and without any reactions.
Well, I think, what's also fascinating to me is I don't understand the political, it's one thing for Mitsotakis to have an agenda, a political motivation, but this can't be coming from he's not that much of an idiot. He comes from a legacy of politicians. This is somebody who obviously understands political dynamics, and I don't really understand what he's going to gain from having, right now the refugee crisis exists and people are aware of it, but they're aware of it because there are refugees who are on the streets. It is only going to get worse 10, 20, 30-fold, 100-fold if you shut down camps and force people to go on the streets and not have access to housing and funds. And how is this beneficial to Mitsotakis? Where politically, because that's, of course, politicians only care about their politics and staying in power. How does that help him?
So Mitsotakis has a very strong team with him, with experienced executives in leadership. So he has built a very strong team around him that help him drive decisions. And he's investing a lot in his image. All the media are on his side.
But all the media is right wing, like everywhere else in the world. All the media is owned by these major media conglomerates and families, and it's not because they are in love with them.
And also, he's investing in social dynamics, meaning that he's always finding social groups to blame and divert the agenda towards something that he wants to pass. He divides and conquers. It's very, very easy to see. A few months ago, he was blaming young folks that are transmitting COVID who were just hanging out in the parks. There was a massive demonstration around this, massive demonstrations, wave demonstrations around this.
Around young people hanging out in the parks?
Yeah, it was. There were demonstrations because at some point,
get off my lawn.
Cops were actually invading the squares and they were arresting people. And in one case in Nea Smyrni, this was caught on tape, and it was a very brutal moment that was circulated around the net, and it led to a massive demonstration. So he's using social dynamics in order to categorize groups of people into certain categories and blame them for the situation. It was the young folks some months ago. Now it's the unvaccinated. Every time he's trying to find someone to blame for the situation, and this is a permanent tactic he's following. He's very aware of how this works, and it's a perfect tool when you have all the media by your side. He's been filing a false tax record for the last 4 years.
So he owns a company.
He owns a company. Mm-hmm. So in Greece, politicians, they need to file publicly their tax records, and he has been filing wrongly filing his tax records, and a French company that he owns shares, and his wife actually owns shares, wasn't appearing in his funds declaration. And there's a newspaper that brought this thing on the surface, and they're not responding. But
they get away with it. I mean, this is ultimately kind of the game that's happening. Everybody's getting away with it. COVID is the economic crisis, COVID, all of these factors are of course, part of why people are exhausted, but also the media is just non-existent now. We don't have investigative reporters like yourself doing the work. Tasso, I have so many more questions, so I'm just going to say, let's do another one. Can we, I'm
Absolutely.
here for a bit.
Anytime.
Okay, perfect.
Lots of things to talk about.
Thank you for everything. Everyone, if you're really interested, of course. If you're interested in learning more about what's happening in Greece, Tasso is the co-founder and he's the editor. It's an incredible breakdown, all in English, AthensLive Wire. As someone who covers a lot of international stuff, it's very hard to find, deep analysis in the English language for the broader globe, really, to read and understand the political dynamics. But I think you did an extraordinary job of doing that. And of course, it's independent media, which does not make it easier. So go check out Athens Wire. What is it? AthensLiveWire.com. Is that it?
It's AthensLive.gr.
Athens Live.
And you can click on newsletter and subscribe.
Go subscribe. If you can throw some dollars or whatever if you're an international audience, just throw what you can. It makes a huge difference. I actually think it makes more of a difference here than it does in the States because just there's a lot of competition, and I think there's more of an audience. And I think in Greece, it goes a long way. So please contribute what you can. Thanks, Tasso.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
right, everybody. CBD love moment, a love bomb for Sunset Lake CBD, not just any CBD, but Sunset Lake CBD. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm to your door. And they have something for everyone, from fudge to dog biscuits to tinctures, gummies, salves, coffee, lotion, all help to design with stress, aches, and pains. And let me tell you, I have all three, and it has helped me quite a bit. I use a salve which has arnica in it for anything from joint pain to rashes to just like putting it under my nose and really enjoying the smell because it smells delicious. I love the tinctures, which help me sleep like a full night's sleep at night. So I'm not tossing and turning or in pain because I have sciatica. Let me just talk about my aches and pains for a second. It's hard to believe that I am not 92 years old because I sound like it all the time when I'm doing these ads, but it really is an extraordinary product. My mother, my family, my aunt gets the fudge. My mom loves the coffee. She loves the gummies. We are huge fans of Sunset Lake CBD in our household. And now my friends are on it as well. But it really, I mean, other than just being a great product, and I think this is why it's a great product, they actually were able to diversify a farm, a Ben & Jerry's farm, that Ben & Jerry's that's really kicking ass in the world right now. Socially conscious, progressive. That's who they are. They are when you're actually supporting Sunset Lake CBD, you are actually supporting rural communities, rural economies, and helping the employment sustain itself in those communities because they are based in Vermont, where that Ben & Jerry's farm was flipped. Not only are they up there in Vermont doing the good work, they pay their minimum wage at $15 an hour, and their employees own the majority of their company. They also support independent media, progressive media like our show, like The Majority Report and The David Pakman Show. Go check it out. They have some biscuits out right now, dog biscuits that you can also eat with your doggy if you're into that. Or you can just eat on your own if you're also into that. But they have 5 milligrams of CBD and contain no artificial flavorings or sweeteners, which is important to me and my pup because I want Bijou to live a very long life. And he is still very puppy-like. And I think it's because we've been giving him a natural diet since his birth. So go check it out. You can get 20% off of your entire order at sunsetlakecbd.com. If you type in Nomi, Nomi, 20% off your entire order, sunsetlakecbd.com, and type in Nomi. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Coming here live to tape from Berlin, similar time zone, is our dear friend Arun Chaudhary. He is a political filmmaker. He was formerly the first official White House videographer, and he was the creative director for Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. I saw that photo you posted. Man. You still are.
I still am middle-aged, though. Let's celebrate that at least.
Let's celebrate that. You post these photos. I don't know if you do it in your public accounts as well, but there are these like lovely little throwbacks of you at the Obama White House or on the Bernie campaign in 2016, which was way more fun, I think. Not than 2020, also more fun than that, but probably also more fun than the Obama. I mean, I'm sure there was like fun in the Obama White House, given the historic context and just juxtaposition to the George W. Bush White House, but I
will say it was a bit joyless in the end because it was still kind of this you campaign from dawn to dusk thing. John McCain was probably going to lose, but you still have to go through the motions anyway. I will say during the actual, because it was so close, the actual like showdown and knowing, and we sort of whitewash this now, but knowing that we were grinding down the front runner candidate that was being pushed by the establishment, people were not allowed to endorse Obama, just knowing that we were grinding them down to a halt and then slowly reversing it did feel like something though. And I think kind of ruined the experience in Bernie a bit for me because people were like, is this what winning feels like? And you're like, this isn't quite what winning feels like. We need to like get over a couple more humps,
Oh no, you knew you had that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the photos of you in the White House though, once you were actually in the White House were, for the kids who did not exist before, whose politics didn't exist before Bernie, there was a moment where there was hope in the Obama world, and you were there for that. You were very present, and the photos are pretty cool. So, but now you host the committee program and you do amazing stuff worldwide. And the committee program, of course, airs here on TNS at 3 p.m. Eastern. It is a great show. I'm getting notes from people about it now. Like, this is kind of how it works. It starts to, you build, and then it starts to click. And then, you know how stuff in the viral universe works. You're not Ben Shapiro and you don't have like the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, it doesn't work virally. It works by a lot of hard work. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactamundo. All right. Speaking of big money funding operations in different places and not knowing how they operate, I wanted to discuss this with you before Rep. Rabb joins us, because you have done work, especially in Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Ukraine. There's an article in Politico, not my favorite publication, but it is an article that is worth discussing, titled "Biden Wants Putin to Behave, So Why Not Go After His Money?" Now, of course, that speaks to me because that's always my angle. Like, just follow the money, and there you go. But it's way easier and it's way more divisive to not follow the money and pretend like it's not there. But I've always felt this way about the Putin angle, and also with Donald Trump. Following Donald Trump's tax returns is important, but I also personally felt as a New Yorker that if you follow all of his money, it might lead back to a lot of real estate holdings in which Democrats are also just as guilty of.
The sexiness of taxes is just the Capone thing. Everyone just remembers in the back of their mind they got Capone on taxes. And so this is just a thing in the back of everyone's mind, The same thing with Watergate. Everybody's like, there's a tape someplace, These just happen to be two different idiosyncratic things.
Right. No, that's exactly it. But yeah, like, there's also, this is a game in some ways that in especially large cities, a lot of this money, that whether it's Putin's money or the oligarchs that are supporting Putin or the oligarchs against Putin, or Chinese oligarchs or Saudi Arabian, pick your favorite oligarch. They're putting their money in real estate holdings. And so from my perspective, specifically with that angle, like, it does tie back to many Democrats in big cities too. And so it's sort of like, we don't touch it. We don't touch it because it also could, in some ways, whether it's developers who, I know this isn't the topic of, this isn't the Putin article, but developers who are reliant on these apartments being bought in cash.
I think all the way from London, New York, anyone who lives in any of these, big cities is very aware that there's a lot of money being laundered in real estate, especially in city centers. It's certainly not only, Russian money. A lot of it comes in, a lot of it is petrodollars and comes in from all over petro states, wherever they are and wherever people are trying to tuck money away.
But, simultaneously, if you're in a city like New York, as opposed to London, these big developers are giving money to Democratic lawmakers, and they're also doing that with the partnership of a lot of the unions that are dependent on these buildings being built and having doormen at the buildings and having whether it's building trades or actual real contractors coming in, and I mean this is part of the ecosystem, and so. Oftentimes, or the tax incentives that are put in place, often, through Democrats, how many times there have been rezonings. So I've always felt like, you don't touch it because it's going to lead back to a lot of folks that we supposedly think are progressive heroes. But that's my soapbox. Let's go back to this because I do think it ties to the question of why don't they try to follow Putin's money? Supposedly he's the world's richest man. What's your take on this? There's the aspect of the ransomware attack specifically, and how that could potentially, like, following the ransomware monies, whether it's organizations that have been buying ads or obviously much more sophisticated strategies.
And I think it's maybe even like often a little bit less sinister and a little more stupid. At the end of the day, the reason some of this stuff doesn't get done, it's like we have so many things that are custom and not law when it comes to how our government operates, how consultants and political operatives who are defined in strange ways, talk about like gig workers, a hard thing to define, actually try to define a lobbyist. Like, this is a slippery thing. And I think there are people who don't want, rather than I'm doing something wrong and I don't want you to uncover it, it's like, I don't even know if I'm doing anything wrong because it's all so squishy and I don't even want to start down this. And I think you measure that off against the fact of we do a lot of economic sanctions against specific oligarchs, against Russians. It's hard to hurt rich people. And when you're going after specifically the segment of the moneyed kind of folks around Putin and stuff, it's actually really hard to hurt them. And so I do think when people tell you people are working hard on sanctions for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I do think there's been kind of a more conscious, and I do appreciate that on the left of, how much economic violence can be wrought from sanctions and how you do want to think about it before you do it. And it's not just, light. But I think when they try to do these things specifically against individuals in Russia, it becomes this extremely complex kind of game of darts. And it may seem ineffective, but I do think it's also, and you may disagree with this, but in proportion to what we're trying to fight against in terms of ransomware, cyber warfare, we do need proportionate response, and an overwhelming economic sanction would be disproportionately harsh. I think we're just talking about Obama, and it's sort of interesting. I do in a lot of these things take the Obama, and I haven't for a while taken a signal from Obama, but in terms of Russia meddling, which is, yeah, they're doing it, but but it's not very effective. They're not particularly good at anything other than selling people oil. And we're really pumping up a regional, a regional tyrant in Putin by doing so.
With that being said, though, I mean, he didn't have the same level of the social Cambridge Analytica didn't exist. I'm not saying that the Russians necessarily were directly linked, but there are coalitions that have been built around whether it's Dugin out of Russia, aligning up with Steve Bannon and really trying to orchestrate.
I'm just saying the actual impressions versus just the chaos that happens online is less significant than people think. And again, this is something that's certainly debatable amongst people, but the actual impressions that you see every day that are sort of nefarious versus normal is so small. And as 75% of people who encounter your Facebook content are encountering it for the first time.
Yeah, but it's dangerous. It's okay, great. But also these people aren't getting vaxxed and they're showing up and they're protesting. Previous segment, we talked about how they're protesting the right-wing government. The right wing is protesting the right-wing government, saying that they're communists. Yeah. I mean, these people are vocal. And of course, power is more responsive to those folks than they are to, and they can hold up any sort of movement way more than a global left that's building, as we know too well. But I think my last question before
Germany is a hotbed for this as well. Also,
tell us more. Yeah.
Where a mob coalesces around probably something that's pushed on Facebook, and the ideology is bizarre. It's essentially neo-Nazis, but they're calling you. They're like, you must be a Jewish Nazi because you're wearing a mask, and you're like, I'm having trouble unparsing, the part where I'm a Jewish Nazi communist, all this together. But it really is just, it's almost like the Bircher Society. And we're like, we're not even sure what you're into, but what you're not into. And you've made a whole little hate club on it. And it does feel a bit like this, a bit ideologically flexible. And I think that's why it's so hard to sort of explain away online, when it's no, let me tell you about vaccines. That's not what it's about, right? It's a hodgepodge of feelings.
It's interesting you say. I feel, depending on the country, and this very well, this is ultimately it. It's they're nimble. They're nimble with their ideology as long as there's an enemy, as long as the enemy is obviously not the pure ethnicity, whatever that ethnicity is. And they're the underdog. They're painting themselves as the underdogs against, maybe the other scapegoats, again, whether it's those in power, whether it's the media, whether it's capitalists, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's progressives, communists. You find it, but they're so nimble. And it's
they're nimble. They leave no traces. Yeah. They leave no traces.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example is, all of a sudden, the kind of idea of the welfare queen as a narrative they talk about is gone. And instead, the real enmity behind Black people is that they are somehow sort of woke middle class folks who want to cancel your police, right? It's no longer there an underclass from the cities who are soaking up your resources, because they are ideologically moving to the left economically, because that's where the hunger for power is. And I do think it's important for everyone watching this, do consume right-wing media as well as consuming the media that you like, as well as consuming, of course, this program and others that are on here. You do need to keep an eye. You do need to keep an eye on this other stuff. And I would recommend, actually, there's a thing called Blind Spot, which is kind of a cool little newsletter you can sign up for, where it kind of shows you news articles that drifted through on the left and on the right without affecting the other. Because there's a lot of this stuff and you don't know what they're talking about unless you pay attention.
Those are good. I think that it's important to go to places where they're reading it and watching it for you, but giving them more clicks, whether it's, sharing a bad article.
You can know what they're talking about. You can know what they're talking about without, getting in too deep. Take a look at the top lines, take a look at the top sheets, look at the headlines, but also Blind Spot's actually a good way probably to get around.
That's great.
That's really helpful. Give you a newsletter.
You mentioned racism, and I have a lot of thoughts because there's been some stuff that's been happening this week. And I want to bring in Rep Rabb because he's been doing some amazing work this week in the Pennsylvania legislature. Welcome to the stage for return. Rep Rabb, representing the 200th District of Pennsylvania in the legislature. He is in his car because I assume he's doing the good work in Pennsylvania. And we're very excited to have you join us because Arun just mentioned how we were talking about the strategies of the right wing and start off with a conversation with Putin, but specifically around just the funding mechanisms and how the media propagates things and how the right is so nimble. I don't know if you caught this piece, but there was an article in Politico by David Siders came out today called "America is Not Racist Becomes the GOP's 2024 Mantra." And my initial take is if you're explaining, you're losing. That's just where I'm going to leave it. But I'm also of the belief that Democrats are so incompetent that we're still in deep trouble. So Rep Rabb, you're surrounded by a bunch of racists in your legislature. What are your thoughts on their defensiveness?
That's quite so. Who's not surrounded by a bunch of racists in the state legislature?
Fair,
right? It's the right. See, that's the issue. It's the norm. If someone were to say sexism doesn't exist, they'd be laughed out. I would hope they'd be laughed out of the room. But somehow when you talk about racism, no, those days have passed. And then you got to ask those people, what constitutes racism for them? Is it a burning cross on the front lawn? Is it saying the N-word in mixed company? In mixed company, right? What is it? Because they keep moving, the boundaries for what is socially acceptable. And at some point, you just have to call a racist. And I think you're right. If you are having to explain yourself, you've already lost. I also agree that generally speaking, not Democrats specifically, but generally, our society is uncomfortable having the difficult conversations, most notably about its origin story, which is largely fiction, and how that revolves around race and specifically white supremacy. So it addresses the stolen land part. It represents the stolen labor part. It represents our founding documents. And they talked about merciless Indian savages in the Declaration of Independence. This is central to all the things we consider most American, even though those things were not made as explicitly as we're discussing it now. And, whether it's manifest destiny, whether it's our participatory democracy that excluded so many folks, these are the conversations that Republicans and conservatives of both parties are afraid to have because their children and grandchildren increasingly are questioning the reflexive, pablum of the rhetoric of, not even can we all just get along, but please stop talking, right? Because we don't want to have those conversations. And so they're going to have issues in their own households, and not so much in their own party, but in that base that they seek to expand. And that base, they want to extend their reach into rural and working class communities. But increasingly, working class folks are seeing their connection to other struggles and seeing it is interrelated systems of oppression that actually allow us to collaborate and conspire shoulder to shoulder to have a greater sense of shared prosperity. So they actually have to work harder because more and more folks who one would think outside of these blue bubbles are opposed to these discussions are actually I think, inspired and informed by them and see their place in society, even though they may not be from BIPOC communities. They can see, oh, wait, I'm being exploited too. Our fates are intertwined.
It's interesting, Arun, and maybe you can comment this and given your thoughts. This is coming from an organization that's religious, right? This is a religious right group. They hosted, it was called the Family Leadership Summit. They hosted an event in Iowa this month with 3 presidential prospects, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and South Dakota's Kristi Noem. And I think it's, I don't know, my thought on this is this could possibly backfire. So I'd love to get your analysis and thoughts, because this might actually put Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and any Democrats who are in a position of defending the filibuster and other like institutions in the Senate that they say are good for democracy. But there's a growing, as we saw, there were protests in Arizona with civil rights leaders. Jesse Jackson, Reverend Barber showed up in Arizona protesting Senator Sinema, saying, and the filibuster. And her whole thing is like, oh, it's good for democracy and it's a great institution. It has a great legacy. And they're like, it's actually an effing racist institution. And like, you have to do something about it. So I feel like this actually, because they're taking it so far right, because they want to depend on the right wing base, it might actually push these centrists to not look so despicable and use democracy as their reasoning. I don't know. I mean, Arun, thoughts on everything.
I disagree tactically with our take on this, in that, I think we're all very nice, reasonable members of the center left who see this as a invitation to a discussion.
You're in Europe. So, center left is very different. Let's just be
No, I always say center left and left because I'm always talking about like the hapless center left party and then all these little parties who attach to it. It's the same. So I'm getting used to always saying that. But it sounds like it's invitation discussion. You're like, oh, you're trying to explain you're losing, and I don't think about it that way. I think about it as the last word in a discussion, probably the smart last word to have in discussion, because they are trying to scoop up the voters who they feel have been pushed too far, who are willing to deal with, a certain amount of wokeness, but who've been pushed on the police, who've been pushed on other things. This is what I think they're thinking. This is the bet that they're making. And that some of those people, it's the end. It's like, you know what? We're not racist. It's not going to be an explanation afterwards of like why we're not racist. That's the whole thing. Like, that's the entire argument. So I think, look for this as the conclusion. They're like, they all had this huge discussion last summers about racism and wokeness and all this stuff. Let me tell you something. That conversation's over. We are not racist. The facts are in. Anyone who feels good about that, vote for us. And I think there's some votes there.
It's sort of I think the Catherine Garcia vote in New York, which is... it's an uncomfortable place, I think, for a lot of, white progressives who really didn't like the homeless being housed in their neighborhoods. And we're protesting, Mayor de Blasio's moves on that. And we're very concerned about supposed rise in crime because the New York Post, they don't read the New York Post, but they pass by it every day. And I feel like when she really leaned in on the crime and punishment aspect of the city, as Eric Adams did, but in a different way, because Eric Adams, even though he's a person of color, a former police officer, they couldn't go that far. And it was much easier for them to vote for a woman. So it's like taking these different molds. And I think that's ultimately it, is like the center left, just as it was under Hillary Clinton, is revealing, or center right too, it's revealing itself to be just fundamentally racist, and they just want to cover it up in whatever way is possible. But that's why I think that this might not work. I disagree with you. I just feel like the right is going to take it so far that Kyrsten Sinema is going to be, backed into a corner. I don't know, Rep Rabb, what do you think? Marinating.
I think that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting analysis, because at some point you're gonna have to draw a line in the sand and say there are certain indisputable facts. And the question that I have, whether it's Senator Sinema or others, and maybe more for her, because she was coming in with her queerness, right, on the front end. So when you have the intersection of LGBTQ issues, which continue to gain steam as well they should, and you're hitting up with this wokeness quotient, what is she going to say? Is she going to say, well, I'm not queer anymore. These issues are no longer important, or these don't, the issues that queer folk face aren't as serious or aren't comparable to issues of racism? Like, that's quicksand. That's going to be challenging for her. So I think the opportunity is there to say, hey, look, if you came in strong on this issue, you're indicted by your silence if you don't acknowledge certain basic facts. And when we talk about, and it's not just racism is one of many isms that are part of these systemic issues that are at the heart of what it is, to be an American, right? And how we operate economically, culturally, socially, spiritually, right? Because churches in a largely Christian nation, at least culturally Christian, is the most segregated institution there is, other than cemeteries. So, I think we're going to have a really interesting inflection point here, and it could go either way. I'm going to be very curious, but that creates a real opportunity for us to put those folks in a corner, right? And I think cinema is in a much better position to be cornered than Joe Manchin.
I mean, we have to put this also in context of the other report. I think it was The Intercept. I forget who put it out, but that there are talking points coming out of, and I'll let you know when I get my DNC talking points, which I usually do around now during the day, that the idea in 2022 is to run against Republicans as being the ones who wanted to defund the police. And this seems like such a convoluted ideological thing to do in the context of what you're talking about, Nomi. So like very specifically, I think this sort of takes that conversation a bit off the table, if that's indeed the strategy.
I mean, maybe that's what they're trying to do, is they're just trying to neutralize it. Knowing very well that, they know that Republicans are going to use crime as a, whether it's completely bullshit or not. I mean, it is bullshit, obviously. We have more police funded
Nixon.
than
They've run
ever
that same
before.
campaign since 68, every single time. Yeah.
That's it, every single time. And of course, the New York City Police Department is the largest and most powerful in the world. It's larger than some military budgets, as we know. They're the greatest surveillance organization. We could go on and on and on. Oh, so the Republicans who are all for funding the police have no problem. I don't understand. I mean, supposedly the crime's up. It's not at all. It's up since 2013, sure. But 2013 was the strongest year ever in terms of crime, and July has been incredibly low. And usually crime does go up in summertime because people are out. Anyways,
but violent crime has been coming down consistently over the past 30 years. Here's the violent crime. Here's the other thing, too, that we don't hear enough about. That's a really good talking point, because it's real. And that is the feature creep of modern policing is significant. What was considered policing, 70 years ago would have been unfathomable. Would have been unfathomable then to think cops would be responsible for all of the things that they're responsible for weighing in on or participating in. Your domestic abuse counselors, you are immigration officers, your mental health experts, right? But they don't have training for any of that stuff.
And an intelligence officer somehow thrown in, Yeah.
Exactly. There are all these things, but here's the open secret. Most folks who want to be cops don't want to be cops so they can file more paperwork and do more things that are not central to law enforcement. Like, that's actually something that I imagine most cops do not want to do. Now, you can say there's a lot of authoritarian figures, right, who are drawn to law enforcement. I think that's fair to say, right? But there's a difference between someone who's attracted to bureaucracy, who's attracted to doing more things that takes them away from like the basics. It's a small percentage, and I'm not suggesting that people are joining the police force because they're do-gooders. What I'm saying is they have a specific image in their mind of what cops should be. And even if that's not an image that we embrace, it sure as hell is not the actual job description when they're working in big city police forces and they're having to take on so many things. And the other thing, cops in big cities with violent crime get paid a lot less than affluent suburbs with significantly less crime. That is something that's not stated a lot. So we're actually asking police officers we're not asking them to do a lot more. The job is asking them to do a lot more in a more violent situation for less compensation. That is actually not a default that most cops want. And my starting point is not, well, what do the cops want? That's not where I'm starting, but it is an important factor in this conversation. Just like we have to also acknowledge that the interests of management in police departments is not the same as rank and file, who are represented by FOP, whereas management is represented by the Chief of Police Association, which, by the way, strongly supported my police misconduct database bill. Strongly. Why? Because when they were hiring people, whether you like the chiefs of police or not, generally speaking, they never wanted to knowingly hire a liability who could get them fired or bankrupt their little township with a civil suit when someone killed or maimed someone. So they were flying blind because they couldn't ask the previous employer, hey, is this person a bad egg? Because that would open them up to liability themselves. So now in Pennsylvania, they can and must ask those questions, and any documented misconduct is in a database for them to see and say, well, you know what? I don't mind them being racist, but they got caught, which means they're stupid, and I don't want to hire them. So that actually is a really good cleavage between management and rank and file that we need to understand as activists, academics, advocates, et cetera, because that will allow us to have the type of transformation within law enforcement that we have not yet seen. Strange bedfellows.
Yeah, no, I think you do see that with the sort of freedom. This is why you do see criminal justice sometimes bringing people together in interesting ways, because it's not a system that's working for anyone. Right. I mean, that's not true. When I say not for anyone, I mean for a very specific set of our industrial, slash justice class. Yeah.
Yes.
But Arun, isn't that why? This is why I'm so confused about the Democrat stance. I understand that they're trying to neutralize. Okay, I get it. It's a theory. I think it's a strategy. It could work, it could not work, but I think there are many strategies that could work instead of actually taking this head on. And credit to a lot of Democrats who I don't always agree with, and we probably don't always agree with, whether it's Maxine Waters or other members of the Congressional Black Caucus. They're just not having it. They're not having it. They're not playing this game, and they shouldn't play this game, because we shouldn't be sitting there saying, okay, no, you're the ones who are for defund the police. How about this? How about be very, let's define it for most Americans, because most Americans, if they have, okay, fine, get rid of defund the police. We'll talk about it from a different perspective. We'll talk about how the NYPD has the 7th largest military in the world, and yet crime has been going down. And you want to continue to, why don't you just fact check it? God forbid they just make every single lawmaker on MSNBC, on NBC, on Meet the Press, on Fox News that they put out there, they just say crime is down. We put more money into police. What do you want? You're listening to the propaganda? You guys believe the fake media saying this stuff? And we're bringing in police from Long Island to police New York City? Come on now. And people have PTSD. How about we fund the VA? Support your military. Instead of them having to come in and become, police officers with weapons-grade machine that you're paying for. I mean, why do these West Virginia police departments need to have major tanks going down the street?
I mean, look, in some ways. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rep.
No, I was just going to say that I represent a very affluent neighborhood, predominantly white. I like to mention it's the birthplace of WASPs. That's what inspired the term white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, was this neighborhood I represent. Very proud. Yeah, very proud. Absolutely. I represent the whitest people in America.
Is it birthplace of WASPs?
That's brilliant. Okay. Note to self, get signed, whitest place in America, but in a 70% Black district. But in my super rich neighborhood, there's virtually no violent crime that's reported anyway. I'm sure there's a lot of domestic abuse. But why is that? Is it because there's a cop on every block? No, they would lose their minds if they felt occupied by Philly police. A lot of them don't even want to acknowledge that their neighborhood is in Philadelphia. They want to be separate. But the reason they don't have violent crime is because they have all the other resources that most Americans don't even know exists. If they have all of those other supports, you don't need that type of presence. So it's not more cops. It's not increasing the budget. It's not giving them more weapons. It's not giving them more criminal offenses to use to lock people, to detain them, to arrest them, to stop. And that's what I'm just coming from a press conference that talked just about that. Can I just talk about it real quick?
Yeah, let's get Arun. That was the next topic we're going to go to, but Arun, real quick, you have thoughts on this last part?
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think, you're laying out the case very clearly again, all these things, and we know this is not safe. And we know, you have people, it's old and tired wins the race. What are you going to believe? My 40 years of experience in politics or your lying eyes? There are people who've been doing this for so long. They are literally incapable. It's been 40, 50 years, incapable of changing their mind about how you run a campaign. No one ever lost a vote locking somebody up. Nobody ever lost a vote putting a cop on the street. These are things that may not be true, but are institutional mantras that people, and again, bless his heart, that people like Joe Biden wake up and say themselves in the morning, every morning, the kids shouldn't smoke dope. And when you cops on the street, it's because it's what he knows. And so I think expecting this ancient political class who dominate the Democratic Party, we know the average age of the leadership is in the 80s, to sort of unlearn 50 years of elections being a certain way or elections being a certain way in their head is not going to happen by 2022. I'm sorry to say. This is not going to be a message that's fixed.
On the bright side, at least, I mean, yes, there is a more sophisticated, right-wing populists are definitely more strategic, but there are fewer of them that are younger and under the age of 75. And they're very good, but are they enough to bring an entire generation back? So I'm hoping that the earth, but before we all take fire, just burn each other's ashes, I'm hoping that it's recentering itself, because this can only last so long. Dianne Feinstein, another term. Okay, Rep Rabb, you just came from a press conference. Speaking of criminal justice, you and the ACLU in Pennsylvania have hosted a press conference to talk about a 3-month pilot program. Can you tell us what this is?
Sure. Well, this is all credit goes to the ACLU of Pennsylvania. There was a court case 10 years ago. Fast forward, they now have a pilot project that will last 3 months in my neck of the woods in Northwest Philadelphia in the 14th Police District, where instead of cops stopping and frisking around various minor criminal offenses, spitting, littering, loitering, prostitution, actually, and disorderly conduct, they will, instead of detaining them, asking for their ID and potentially arresting them, they will just tell them to stop. And if they stop, then they go away. So, I mean, that's what, the cops do with white folks. So we're,
okay.
So that is the appropriate thing to do, assuming those criminal offenses should be criminal offenses to begin with. So I listen, drinking from an open container in public, that's a law. Spitting, it's a law. Littering, law. Sex work, law. Right? We can quibble about what is what, but littering is pretty straightforward. Spitting is pretty straightforward, regardless of where you stand on it. But there's one I want to read to you that is deeply problematic, and you tell me what you think. This is an offense for a person who, with intent to cause public inconvenience, annoyance, or alarm, or recklessly creating a risk thereof, engages in fighting or threatening, or in violent or tumultuous behavior, makes unreasonable noise, you heard me correctly, unreasonable noise, versus reasonable noise, of course, uses obscene language, and that's a fucking shame, or creates an obscene gesture, or creates a hazardous or physically offensive condition by any act which serves no legitimate person of the actor. So what is a legitimate purpose? Who determines that? The cop. It's legitimate if you're in Chestnut Hill, in an affluent, that's legitimate. If you're over here in Germantown, all right, that's not legitimate. What is a obscene gesture? Who defines obscenity? This is the ordinance. This is not the ordinance. This is the state law that defines disorderly conduct, folks. So we use disorderly conduct all the time, but when you actually read it out loud, you realize how absurdly vague it is. And the reason it's absurdly vague is to help the carceral state, to help prosecutors lock up more people or have more ammunition to do so, to expand their toolkit, to leverage it, to disproportionately hurt BIPOC and poor folk in the criminal justice system. So I actually have a bill that will repeal disorderly conduct, get rid of the entire thing. What's happening here is cops will not be able to arrest folks as long as they say, stop doing whatever it is you're doing, and that person stops.
But it's still intimidation, though.
Other issue. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I mean, the fact that they even have to say, stop doing, don't stop doing. I mean, there's also inherent bias. There's so many other issues. Obviously, we know the white supremacist organizing that's happening in these police departments. So it's not like, some robot is suddenly deprogrammed and is just saying, stop doing what you're doing. I mean, how are they going to look at the police forces around the country? You know what's illegal and what's not illegal. And yet they still get away with violence, murder regularly. So, okay, you tell them to not arrest. That's fine. Does that mean they're going to get more violent? Does that mean when you say stop, there's more altercation? Like, what's the alternative?
Right. Well, in the past 50 years, my state has actually put on the books 1,500 new criminal offenses, 1,500 over the past 50 years. So we're feeding a beast that should not even exist. So this is the commercialization, the industrialization of a carceral system that was meant to marginalize, subdue, to punish in a very racialized way. And removing those things could have a huge impact, could not only help, with these battered communities, but also help in terms of being more employable, using marshaling those resources to things that we actually need, which is what the folks around defund have basically said. I mean, the terminology has been skewered, but ultimately they're saying, let's put the money where we know it's going to work, where it's not about caging people, harassing people, arresting people, and buying shiny new, dangerous objects for law enforcement.
Armored personnel cameras.
Exactly, right. But, not just demilitarize the police, but narrow the scope of what policing is. And ultimately, we should be using different verbs here. It's not about policing. It's about how do we intentionally build community well-being. And the fact that we don't use that terminology, community well-being, is because public safety up until now has been really heightening the protection rhetorically and physically of white women and girls. The statue of the in front of the police headquarters in Philadelphia is of a 50s era white cop guy holding a little white girl. It is the ultimate, it is the literal embodiment of what public safety looks like. It is the basis of excuses around lynching for 200 years. You looked at a white girl. You whistled at a white woman. Public safety is it safe for white women and girls to feel comfortable, to feel safe in the midst of all these bad people. We have to expand public safety to be community safety, which means that whatever community that is ascribed to you, no matter if it's queer, immigrant, Black, what have you, that you feel as safe in the body you inhabit and the neighborhood in which you live as anyone else. And we've never known what that even remotely looks like, because what we're talking about now has been the norm since the very creation of our society. So we can't use terms, just like Arun, you were talking about folks who've been processed to think a certain way for 50 years, more cops on the street, this or that. The same is true with some of the language we use, and we got to stop using it. And some of these things are pretty innocuous, but the impacts are not.
Final thoughts, Arun.
No, I mean, this is a rhetorical battle that people almost need to not wage. It's just like, we have made clear as a movement where we think like the guardrails on needing to push the police argument, and that is resourcing differently at the very least and trying to resource less on things that are bad. And if Democrats think that they're going to unify to put out the opposite message, I mean, that's just a definition of mixed messages, and that dog ain't going to hunt. That's my final thought.
Yep.
Well said.
Take tax the rich. I mean, I have the same thoughts about tax the rich for whatever I think there's this aspirational aspect of so many Americans where they think they can be rich or will be rich or are rich when they're not. And, how about this? Tax Elon Musk to pay for the police force that he relies on. I don't know. I'm thinking of different, just jealous while I'm sitting here. The bottom line is, you got to tie it together. Just tie it together. I mean, because they do rely on them. I mean, look at Amazon. I mean, or cancel the Amazon DoD contracts. I mean, this is stuff that's unpopular on both sides. They don't like it. They don't like that Amazon and these billionaires are making all this money off of the pandemic. Taxing the rich. This was the problem in the beginning with Donald Trump. Is like people thought they saw themselves in Donald Trump. They saw the idea of what they were becoming, and we all know people like this. They're there. They're aspirational millionaires and billionaires. They read self-help books. That's why it's an exploding industry. All right, guys, I appreciate you. As always, Arun Chaudhary, Rep Rabb, keep up the amazing work. Defending our democracies, doing really good work on the ground. That's one thing I'll say about our show is I feel like we have a good crew of folks who are actually doing the work on the ground as well as on air. So thank you to you all. And thank you to our producer, Brad, who has been dealing with all the tech issues that we face on a normal basis in 2021. And thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you to everybody in the chats, the live chats, the super chats, everyone. We are going to be shifting some stuff, just adding a few more features in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. If you are not already, and I should have done this plug earlier, please join us on Patreon because our patrons make this show work, especially when we have Wi-Fi issues. It is there's so many things that you don't even know go into the show when you're not in a studio. Studios are expensive also. So maybe we'll be able to get back to a studio at some point. But in the meantime, there's lots of sound mixing that needs to happen and all this stuff takes work. And we appreciate you who are patrons for making sure that this show comes out every week. Of course, we have a new schedule. We are doing 2 hours, Wednesdays and Fridays, Fem Fridays on Friday. We also have the committee program on Monday for 2 hours. So you're getting pretty much a ton of programming, 6 hours of programming. Instead of having it daily, you're getting it in larger chunks because we wanted to have deeper conversations about defund the police and the strategies behind, how you challenge the right wing. We wanted to have deeper conversations about what's happening abroad, how fascism is spreading, and the different flavors. That is why our show is special, in my opinion. So join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. If you can contribute, please do. If you're having any issues, if you want to take a break, please email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We have lots of different ways to work with folks. On that note, we will see you on Friday for Fem Friday. We appreciate you and stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. flash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.